thank you so much for coming on the Wellness Unwrapped podcast.
It's a real privilege. I'm really glad to be Zooming with you and having this conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, me too, me too. So I was thinking this morning, I actually met you physically only fairly recently. It was January at the Birmingham Functional Forum.
Yes, that's right.
Where I was on a panel with a couple of amazing doctors talking about kind of, lifestyle interventions, etc. So, and we've been kind of planning for a while to get together, and then lockdown happened. So we're doing it over Zoom.
Yeah.
It's good enough. So, Sally, I wonder if you could tell our listeners a little bit about your own journey, because you've had quite an unconventional journey, haven't you, as a GP?
Yes, yeah. So I've been a doctor now for 21 years, graduated in 1999. And I went into general practice. And I think right back then when I was training in medicine, I'd always had this tension in me where we learn all about the body and how it functions and what it needs, and then like in the last couple of years of our medical training, it's like, right guys, forget that, learn disease management, get people into a disease category and then treat a disease. And just this huge shift towards disease and guidelines, and it never really made sense to me. It seemed very illogical. So that was always kind of brewing in the background. And then I went overseas for a few years working with an aid agency in Sudan and Uganda. And I came back in 2008 to start working in the inner city in Nottingham as a GP. And a number of things had happened in that time while I'd been away. And there was this big shift towards guidelines in order to bring some uniformity of care for the whole country, good intention, but they had gone from guiding our decisions to very much being law. And you felt you could never deviate from them. And if you look at any guidelines, they're very, very heavily weighted towards prescribing. And I was feeling this incredible pressure to prescribe. And then what I was seeing is that often I was prescribing because I was prescribing and there were side effects, and just getting into this terrible tangle of people being on a huge amount of drugs. And then again, like I said, there was just this huge emphasis on disease management. And if you didn't fit a disease category, we almost wait as GPs until you do. And then we treat that. And there was just, instead of focusing on the individual and on the person, we were treating diseases, assuming that everybody's disease had the same root cause. And then finally, the thing that bothered me is that there had been this loss of continuity of care in general practice, where I had gone from knowing grandma and grandchildren, and that question that they didn't get quite to get the answer to, I'd say, well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. That all was lost. And by 2008, I was seeing 40 patients a day, 10 minutes at a time. And like the patients were sick of telling their story to another doctor. I was sick of never getting to the bottom of things. And then what happened sort of late in 2010 is that I lost my own health and had really weird symptoms, like just tired all the time, weird skin sensations. I mean, I was the nightmare patient. I dreaded to go and see my GP because he was probably rolling his eyes going, oh no, here she's coming again. And he kept telling me, Sally, your blood results are fine. They're normal. On reflection, now I know what I know, they weren't normal. And I went through the NHS, got a diagnosis, got my label, got given drugs. And I had this.
What was your label, Sally?
So I got labelled with chronic migraine, even though I didn't have any headaches, which is a little bit odd, but it is a diagnosis. And I got given drugs, and I felt even worse on the drugs. And I remember going back to my neurologist saying, like, is there anything I can do to help get myself better? And he just slipped this prescription across the desk and said, Sally, try this. And I walked out, and it was this tipping point for me where I was like, no, there has to be a better way. You're not telling me what is wrong with me, and you're not telling me how to get better. And so I went initially back to the books, like, what does my body need? Like, what does it need nutritionally? What does it need hormonally? What does it need in order to thrive and heal? And that kind of, led me to recover my own health. Like within weeks, I'd been unwell for 10, 11 months. And then fell into this world of other physicians who are asking the same questions, what we would talk about as functional medicine or lifestyle medicine, where it's looking at root cause, and it's looking at, like, gosh, if we can create an environment in our body and around our body that will help our body heal because it's wired to heal, and then from that, coming forwards of 5-6 years, have created a framework where I use 5 foundations that underpin health in order to help people recover their health. And I talk about sleep, rest, nutrition, movement, and connection. And that's connection with self, with each other, and with that wider sense of purpose. And there's beautiful science in all of that, which wasn't there when I trained, and now, you know, is there, and it's really grounded. And I've been helping people recover their health using that over the years. So yeah.
Did you get yourself better?
I got myself better within weeks. Within weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and
what did you do?
I think the backdrop of that time is I recognized stress was an issue, and I'd got 3 children under the age of 6. I was working, you know, difficult hours. I lived in a sort of community where we did a lot of life together, and there's a lot of people in my home all the time, and I'm an introvert, and that was quite a challenge. And so I had already clawed back a lot on stress management and creating some rhythms that gave me life. And so that was already going on, and I also recognized the need for sleep, and had started really prioritizing that, you know, on the back of having, you know, young kids. And I'd done things like getting moving and more active, but I think the big thing for me was the confusion around nutrition, which you may understand. It's so confusing when you start Googling how to eat well. I mean, you've got Professor so-and-so saying high fat, you've got Professor so-and-so saying low carb. I mean, it's so confusing. But for me, it was the nutrition piece. Like, if you look at migraines, it's to do with this mechanism or body called oxidative stress. And I basically just thought, I'd read some studies in the Lancet, and I was like, right, I'm going to have a really high antioxidant diet. I didn't know what I was doing back then, but I shifted to a very clean meat, very plant-based, you know, drinking a lot more, anything that was high in antioxidants and polyphenols, I was eating it. And that completely stopped my migraines in the track, but it left me with really bad fatigue. And what happened probably after 6 weeks, I started reading the stuff around gluten, and I decided to have a trial of being gluten-free, knowing that I didn't have celiac disease. And the whole concept of, you know, non-celiac gluten intolerance was new to me back then. And I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, I just don't eat gluten for 3 weeks. And so I tried that, and my energy recovered really rapidly. And so I recovered my health that way.
Amazing. That's so inspiring to hear. And was this around the same time that you studied with the Institute for Functional Medicine?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I mean, initially, I literally went back to the books myself, and I did a lot of unlearning about health. And you know, I had no idea back then that like 90% of chronic disease is to do with lifestyle. You know, I thought it was all genetics, and it was all about getting the right drug, and it was just all about disease management. I had no idea that diabetes could have a host of different root causes. I mean, you get so, it's like so brainwashed into a certain way of thinking when it comes to how we currently do current modern day medicine. And I had to undo a lot of that. So, and then I fell into the world of functional medicine, because if you look up functional medicine, like on Wikipedia, it sounds like a load of quackery. And honestly, some of my colleagues rolled their eyes at me when I started talking about it. But actually, as you know, like the science is just, as far as I'm concerned, it's irrefutable and just beautiful. And it was just so lovely then to discover this whole, you know, host of physicians that for 30 years have been asking the same questions, have gone ahead of us in terms of pioneering this, mainly in America. And I did have to get over my skepticism. It took me about 9 months of really thinking, I think they're crackpots. And before I finally kept looking at the research and thinking, oh no. And then I tell you, it was like a rebirth. Like, I used to wake up in the night going, oh, we can like turn the tide of chronic disease in our nation. Like, this is just phenomenal. Like, and I have been obsessed now for like 5 or 6 years. I have changed my career, I have changed the way I practice, I've changed the way I do family, and I am utterly convinced that we need to have a movement that can give the nation her health back. And we can do it through changing lifestyle, you know, those 5 foundations. Before we have to get too complicated and see functional medicine doctors, there's a whole host of stuff we can do first that we can see incredible results. And I have seen incredible results, you know, everything from rheumatoid to thyroid to fatty liver to obesity, like again and again, seeing people recover their health just by getting the basics well. And then there's a small section of people who do need, you know, a functional medicine doctor who knows how to go that bit deeper. And there's definitely a place for that. But I don't think you know, that's expensive and not accessible to everybody. And there's so much that we can do before we have to go down there and invest in our health in that way. So
yeah, I love it. I absolutely share your passion. And I'm just with you all the way, Sally. I actually didn't have to unlearn anything because I've never been to medical school. So as soon as I met these guys, you know, and we're talking about the, you know, the great functional medicine doctors in the US, like, you know, Dr. Mott Hammond, like for me, it was so obvious that what they were saying was completely true. So I didn't have to battle through any level of skepticism because I just looked at the science from the point where I was, which was I hadn't learned anything previously. And it just made so much sense. And as you say, it works. And you can see it work, and I can see it work, you know, when I'm coaching people through these very simple techniques, you know, of just switching up their lifestyle habits. And it is remarkable to actually see what happens, you know, within, as you say, within weeks. And it's not just in terms of, you know, their blood results and, you know, and their belly fat and all the rest of it. It's that they come to life, isn't it? And I'm sure you see this as well. It's they find their purpose in life, and suddenly they want to live life to the full, and they can live life to the full. And it's a beautiful thing to watch somebody just start to bloom and thrive.
Absolutely. And I think, like, in terms of what you're doing, like, I think health coaching is the absolute future of getting, you know, helping people change, because I think there's one element around knowledge, but we know that knowledge doesn't change anything. You know, it's actually how do we help people change. And certainly in my work, I work with a health coach. She is just phenomenal, and I attribute all of my patients' changes to what she does. And so I think, like, the future of, like, reversing chronic disease nationally is not only, you know, doctors and GPs understanding the impact of our lifestyle decisions, but it's creating mechanisms where you can coach people back to health, because we need help to change, and because change is very challenging, and we need each other, and we need community, and in order to create habits that will sustain us in the long term and bring sustainable change. So I think it's fantastic what you're doing, Susie. So, and I think, you know, I followed you for a couple of, well, I don't know, it's a year or a couple of years, and I've always loved, you know, your approach and your enthusiasm and seeing what you're doing. So it's great. Yeah.
I'm so honoured to hear that. Thank you so much. So we're here today to talk about sleep. Yes. So where do you want to start?
I mean, the thing is about sleep, I think it is, do you have that thing where people go, what's the one thing? Where should I start? Like, what's the most important foundation?
Yeah.
And we know that these foundations feed into each other, and these lifestyle choices feed into each other. But I think if push came to shove, like, I would often say start with sleep. Knowing that, you know, sleep deprivation, it just impacts every nook and cranny of our health. And especially if we're looking at weight loss, like, hormonally, you are set up to gain weight if you are sleep deprived, and you are just battling a whole host of internal mechanisms if you don't get that right. And so sleep is often the place I start. And I think possibly, like, in the 90s when I trained, we knew, like, if you didn't sleep, you died, but we didn't understand why we slept. And I think, you know, a great resource for people if they're going to go deep is, you know, Matthew Walker's book, Why I Sleep. And I think, like, the science around sleep is the thing that has been like the biggest impact on the way I practice. I had no idea of its importance, and many of my colleagues don't understand it. And so yeah, I think starting, maybe with just the importance of sleep.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about how to do it, because
yes, absolutely,
people, they need to know, that they need to prioritize it and how much they need. But there's a whole host of people, and I'm one of them, where sleep can be just so elusive. Like, you're lying there thinking, okay, I'm in bed, it's 10 o'clock.
yeah.
I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
And
I think that is so frustrating for people. And firstly, I completely agree with you. Matthew Walker's book is an absolute masterpiece, and for anybody who wants to dive deep into this, it's just a must read. It's a phenomenal book. But yes, I think this is actually quite an emotive subject, because I think for so many people who desperately want to go to sleep and find themselves lying awake in the small hours, and then they read a post from me or you about the risks, from not sleeping, and it's hard to read that. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, you must be an amazing sleeper if you're posting about that. You must be an amazing sleeper. And that is really not always the case. Sometimes I sleep really well, sometimes I sleep shockingly badly, but the difference is now compared to 10 years ago is I know what happens when I'm not sleeping. And I used to be very cavalier about sleep, particularly when the children were young. I used to treat it, the nighttime, as a whole other kind of opportunity to get the things done that I hadn't managed to get done during the day. So it was like, oh, great. I'd go to my computer, I'd have my cup of tea. Everything was quiet. It was dark. Everyone else was in bed. There was no one going, mummy, mummy. And I would just, it was wonderful. I would just like, oh, I'll start my reports. When I used to work in PR, I would never, ever do that now. Never. I mean, there is just, I cannot conceive of any piece of work that would persuade me to crack open, my computer at that time. And I remember around that time, also my kids weren't sleeping. I wasn't great with getting my kids to sleep well. My boys, like my middle child, Louis, he would wake up hourly looking for his dummy, even though I put like 12 dummies all around his cot. And at the time I was in a very, very demanding job that actually involved a commute with his 2 young children. And I remember one day, firstly, I was permanently exhausted. I was permanently ill. I was crying a lot, partly to do with the horror of the job, and partly because I just could barely get through the day. And I had no emotional resilience at all. And I remember one day, I always left work late. I was always late for nursery, always, because I was trying to write one last email, with my bum in the air when you think you've left the office. And I was on my way to nursery late again, and I just was going onto the M56 and I felt my eyes closing. So I was in heavy traffic, and it was terrifying because I shouldn't have been behind the wheel of a car. And I was going to pick up 2 small children and put them in the car, and then drive home. And there was nothing I could do. I couldn't pull over. I was already late. And I just kind of put the radio on really loud, wound down the window. But I shouldn't have been behind a wheel. It's a lethal weapon. I was putting my own life at risk and the lives of people around me. And I see that now all the time in people. I do a lot of corporate wellness coaching, and people will sometimes admit to me that they have to make a phone call, or they have to sit like a mobile junk food pod in their car just to stay awake. Just to stay awake. And in fact, one guy said to me, I think it was last year in the workshop, he told me about a time where he had woken up and he'd driven to bollards on a motorway. He survived. He was there to tell the tale, but he'd fallen asleep.
Yeah, and we see this in our world, Susie. I mean, I trained at a time where I used to do 120-hour weeks. I would do a 56-hour weekend where I'd start on a Friday morning at 9 o'clock and I would finish on a Monday at 5 o'clock with no protected sleep. This is before the EU directives. Making decisions about life and drugs and calculating things. And I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers, you know, that we would do that. Or if you look in hospitals where, you know, we know that when we go to sleep, it improves our immunity, our ability to fight infection, it heals us up physically, it heals us up mentally. And yet the sleep quality that people get in hospitals is just utterly abysmal. And it just hasn't, the science hasn't seemed to radiate it into the thinking of, you know, our medical educators and our, you know, and our health providers as well, and how we care for patients. And I mean, like we said, there's just not an area of our health that it doesn't impact. You know, you're looking at the business world. We know that, you know, creativity improves when you sleep, productivity will improve. We know that memory improves. And actually here we have a absolutely horrific issue with, you know, memory issues and Alzheimer's and dementia, and but how much of that is just sleep deprivation? Because we know that when you're sleep deprived, you don't create long-term memories and you can't actually absorb more information. And or with our kids, where they're on their screens late at night and they're not getting their sleep, like it's the thing that will impact their education, because it reduces their ability to learn, reduces their ability to be creative. So it's just that whole, you know, or even just basic things. If we look at the big killers, I mean, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, we all know go up with sleep deprivation. And how many times, how many patients have gone in with diabetes and the doctor said, well, how are you sleeping? Thinking that it could be a root cause, or hypertension, or, you know, or there's studies where if there's certain types of sleep that you don't get, that you can, you know, end up psychotic with a psychotic illness.
Yeah. Did you, I don't know if you recall that bit from Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, but there was one bit which I mean, there was so much that hit me between the eyes, but there was a study he cited that was done, I think, in the 1960s. Yeah. I don't think they do it now. I don't know if you remember that one, but it was with teenagers and they deprived them of, I think it was the REM sleep.
Yeah.
And they were healthy. They were just normal teenagers, no history of any sort of psychological problems, either in themselves or their families. And within a couple of days, they were showing symptoms of psychosis, weren't they? They were imagining that the researchers were trying to murder them. Yeah. And it's incredible to go from perfectly healthily, mentally stable within days to someplace that you would have been diagnosed as being psychotic and put on drugs for that.
And it's interesting, like, you know, when we're just talking about teenagers as well, because when we go to sleep, there's certain clocks, aren't there, that help us sleep. They're called our circadian rhythms, and they're mediated by sleep hormone, which is just a little communication molecule that helps us sleep, called melatonin. And we know that in teenagers that clock shifts forward, so they struggle to get to bed and get to sleep until later. But then we have like school times. Certainly for my children, they have to get up, well, when they are at school, they have to get up at 6 o'clock to get 2 buses across town to get to school. So, and we know that in those last couple of hours, just before they wake up, in that 8 to 10 hour cycle that they need in order to function properly, we know that's really about resetting their emotional health. We know it's about learning. We know it's about creativity. So at a time when our kids really, really need to be learning and they're struggling with all their emotional health, with all their hormones that are going on, we're taking something that's really essential with these kind of early school times. Yeah. And so when I read it, I've actually tried as much as possible to take my kids in the car just to give them that extra hour.
Oh, gosh, bless you. Well, it's something I've been thinking about so much, Sally, because obviously I only have one child who's still at school because my two boys are big now, but my daughter is 14, and obviously she's not been at school since when was it? You know, late March. And I mean, look, I would love her to be back at school. There's no question. I wanted to be back with her friends and in that formal learning. But I have to say, she has got an extra 3 to 3.5 hours sleep a night, not a week. Per night, she has got an extra 3 to 3.5 hours sleep. because she normally has to get up at 6:30 to get, again, it's a long journey on a bus. And initially when the school shut, I was like, right, we need to keep to a schedule. You need to start work at 9. That lasted precisely 24 hours, right? And then I ditched the whole lot and thought, you know what, I'm just going to let her do what she wants. So she wakes up when she wakes up. And she said to me the other day, she said, you know what, Mummy, I don't get tired in the evenings. I just feel better. And it really made me think how much sleep she is missing out on every day of the week, Monday to Friday, dragging herself out at what is an unearthly hour for her, you know, to go out in the dark and then have to sit and learn, you know, and she'll be studying for her GCSE soon. So it was a real eye-opener.
Yeah, no, it has been for me. I've got a 14-year-old, 12-year-old and 10-year-old. And I was the same. Ours lasted about a week of Mum getting everybody out of bed, getting them working at 9 o'clock. And then it occurred to me, it's like, oh no, this is a really beautiful opportunity. And so we shifted things back, and they, you know, and they've found their own routine that works for them. And definitely, like, I've seen the positive benefits of my kids having more sleep on their learning and on their mood and on their energy. So yeah, no, it is. But yes, so, but what about those poor people who can't sleep, Susie?
Yeah, well, Sally, I must tell you that my mum has suffered from insomnia. Now, she maintains that she's been on sleeping pills since the Second World War.
Right.
Yeah, because she was a little girl, and she said, you know, she'd hear the bombs. Yeah. And so that's what she says, is that she's not been able to sleep since the Second World War, and she will literally just wander around at night. She's a big one for pharmaceuticals. She always has been, and it's really hard for her. And I know she's not alone. You know, so many people just can't sleep.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, initially we probably need to answer the question of how much is enough, and is very unique to individuals. And I think it really varies between sort of 7.5 and 9 hours asleep. And I often say to people, that's asleep, not in bed, because, you know, there's a whole efficiency to sleep. And even if you're an amazing sleeper, your efficiency is probably only about 90%. And so prioritizing sleep is the big thing. And actually the majority of our nation, that's what they need to hear. They need to value it and understand all of the risks associated with it. We touched on some of them, you know, diabetes, road traffic accidents, obesity, creativity, memory issues,
Alzheimer's
issues, Alzheimer's, dementia, I've said diabetes. So there's just this very, very real impact, and that might sound like scaremongering, but people need to understand the importance of it in order to reverse disease and stay healthy, and they need to prioritize it. And so for some people, it's turning Netflix off, it's reprioritizing how they structure their week, it's understanding that you can't do catch up, you can't just do, you know, hard 5 days and sleep in at the weekend. You don't get the health benefits, you cannot undo the damage that's been done. So there's that element, but then there's those of us, like we say, that struggle to sleep, and I think there is this thing called sleep hygiene. Maybe that's a new word to people, but we can, by understanding how we sleep and the mechanisms that help us sleep, we can create an environment where our body sleeps better. And there's a whole host of things that we can do. Now, sometimes, maybe like you, I will do 1 or 2 of them that are a regular part of my routine, but then there are other times where I will do all of them, and I have to do all of them in order to get that good quality of sleep. And I think it's just worth mentioning that if sleep really is an issue, and you're really sleepy in the daytime, and you might have something called sleep apnea if you're a heavy snorer, it's worth going to your GP, it's worth talking about it, it is worth getting help because of the health benefits. But yes, sleep hygiene is all about creating that right environment so our body can heal and sleep. And I think the big thing for me, when I start talking to people, is I think routine is key. And it's creating a routine, because our body works on clocks. all throughout our body, our digestion, our sleep, our hormones, everything is working on these clocks. It's often related to light, as we've evolved over thousands of years. And so if we can respect that, we will basically create that, we will fit in with what's going on in our body to help us sleep, to do with our sleep hormone. And so I think, you know, routine is key, and it's working out what a routine is good for you. There are different types. Some of us, you know, there's this thing called chronotypes, which is genetically how we're wired. Some of us like to stay up late, and we come alive in the evenings, and we want to sleep later. And there's those of us like me who need to be in bed for 9 o'clock, and I like to be up at 5, 6, and, you know, and that's the routine that works for me. And if you have a lifestyle in terms of job that can respect that, then respect the way your body's made, and imitate that. Unfortunately, we live in a world where most of us have to get up early, and it doesn't suit those kind of night owls. But you can, even with that, have to work harder, but train your body to sleep by keeping a routine, which is, you know, when you go to bed and when you get up, and keeping that time. And then I think the other big ones would be temperature. So our body needs to drop a degree in order to get to sleep and stay asleep. And so keeping a cool room can be really helpful. It can be a real game changer. Stress, like, we have to be managing our stress. And this is my thing. Like, I know as soon as my sleep goes, I'm literally like, I'm stressed. What am I doing about it? And the whole, you know, the whole purpose of stress, you know, stress is a good thing, but it needs to be a cycle. We need to close it. And the stress response there is to keep us hyper vigilant, hyper alert. It's to help us perform. It shuts down all the bits of the body that we don't need, long-term memory, gut function, and all of that kind of, you know, immunity we don't need, in order to perform in the moment. And but we need to close that cycle, because otherwise that hypervigilance will mean that we're not sleeping. The classic thing is waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, your heart going, and you're thinking about loads of stuff. That is because our cortisol, which is this stress hormone that mediates these responses, is still high in our body. So we need to get really aggressive about eliminating hurry, and about learning how to de-stress, which is a whole topic in itself. And it's very personal to how we're wired. So I would go routine, temperature, I would go reducing stress, and then we need to talk about caffeine. So
yeah, well, let's talk about caffeine.
Yeah, so caffeine is a psychoactive drug. That means it crosses over into your brain and has impact on our brain function. And it's found in coffee, tea, green tea, chocolate, caffeinated drinks like Pepsi and Coke and what have you. And the thing is, it takes about 6 to 12 hours to get out of our body, depending on how good we are at detoxifying things. And in terms of sleep, what happens is we have this sleep hormone, which I've mentioned, which is called melatonin, but there's another thing that helps us sleep called our sleep urge. And what happens during the day, there's this little chemical molecule that builds up in our brain called adenosine. We don't have to remember that. And but what it does is, when it gets to a certain level, it kind of communicates to our brain and says it's sleepy time. And what caffeine does, it sits on those receptors. And so our brain can't feel that it's sleep time. You know, it can't feel that sleep urge, and directly opposes it. So, and that's why we need the routine with the melatonin, and we need to keep those receptors nice and clear so that it knows it's ready to sleep. And that's why removing, caffeinated drinks and foods out of our diet. And I say midday being the latest. Quite frankly, I don't get away with that. I love my coffee. It's part of my routine, my 6 o'clock routine. I sit quietly and I prepare for the day, and I hate giving it up. And my kids actually never want me to give it up because they say I'm grumpy. So if I do caffeine at 10, 11 o'clock, it definitely affects my sleep. It's just the way I am. So so those are some of the key things, and we haven't talked about light yet, but is there anything you're rabbiting on? You won't just shut me up.
Well, it's all such great stuff, isn't it? you know, with the caffeine thing, I am actually not a big coffee drinker, but I remember I like an iced coffee on holiday. And I remember being on holiday last summer, and I saw it was around 4 o'clock, and I just thought, oh, I really fancy an iced coffee. Yeah. And I swear to you, Sally, I could hear Matthew Walker's voice in my head. And I knew it was the wrong thing to know. I just thought, oh, sod it, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Yeah. And there I was, you know, at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm thinking, it so wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it. You know, I didn't even enjoy it that much. And this is the thing, I always regret it. I mean, we haven't talked about alcohol, but I really like a glass of red wine, but I've said to my family, please don't give it to me, because every single time I wake up, ping, at 1 o'clock in the morning, which I hate. Yeah. I hate. And as much as I enjoy the glass of red wine, it's just simply not worth it for me to lose a night's sleep. So I've said to my husband, please just stop offering me, because it harms me. Yeah. So
I always say drink in the morning.
Yeah.
My patients love that idea. The doctors just told me to have an alcoholic drink in the morning. But no, the whole point is that we need to get alcohol out of our system, don't we?
Yeah.
So sometimes actually, you know, lunchtime or an early evening drink can be tolerated. There are risks with any use of alcohol from a cancer point of view. But yeah, you could get away with it, but it needs to be out your system by the time that you go to sleep. Partly for the same reason, you know, we can talk a little bit about prescription drugs, is that it's a sedative, and what that means is that you're unconscious to the world, but you don't get into your healing, the depth of sleep that promotes healing. So we didn't touch on it, but you know, there's different cycles in sleep. Like you have these 90-minute cycles, and it goes through different depths, and at different times, you know, different things are healing up physically, emotionally, creatively, and it goes through these cycles through the night, with a preference to healing different parts of us as you go through the night. And what you do is, with any sedation, is that you lose that, and you lose that healing. So you might think you've been asleep, but you've not actually healed. And it's the same with prescription medication. I will not prescribe sleepers anymore, because of the associated risk with cancer and with all-cause mortality. Like, they haven't done studies to say that it causes it, but it's because it's not safe enough to do the studies. And I will use it in extreme circumstances. If somebody's at risk to their life, if they are at risk to somebody else, then absolutely there's a time to use them. And that, you mentioned your mum. It's very, very difficult to get people off sedative sleepers, because you get this rebound insomnia, and you have to work very, very hard in order to overcome that. And it's a very real thing. So, but yes, and that's where sort of alcohol and sleeping tablets go hand in hand. So if you are on sleepers and you're alarmed by that, then you might need to work with a doctor about coming off them slowly, and then you have to learn all the things about sleep hygiene and do all of them. And actually, for those people, I try and get them involved in cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, CBTI. It's very, very effective at helping with chronic long-term sleep problems. But definitely in terms of an investment in your health, it's worth coming off those types of medication.
So what would you ever prescribe anything? I'm thinking now in terms of kind of softer interventions, things like magnesium or melatonin. Can you, before you get onto light, can you just mention those briefly?
So I think there's, so magnesium I do use. Magnesium's a vitamin, and often we're very deficient in it as a nation. Some studies would suggest 40% of us are deficient, and magnesium is involved in about 300 different processes in the body, and one of those are around sleep and producing your sleep hormones. And it's not, we are deficient of it because it's not in our soil anymore, it's not in our food. And I don't think you can really overdose on magnesium, except that you will end up with diarrhea.
Yeah.
So magnesium is a nice one to try, but and there's other things, like there's some smaller studies. When you're looking at studies, you're looking at animal studies and human studies. The ones that I'm aware of that have some human sort of studies would be things like passion flower and valerian root extract. That I'm aware of. I'm not a naturopath, and when people want to go down that naturopathic route, I tell them to go and see a naturopath and get some advice on that. So those are the things I would tend to use if I was prescribing, but I would always embed that within sleep hygiene. So because the easy thing to say is, oh, well, it's not working. And it's like, well, it's because you're still drinking caffeine, watching your screens till midnight, and there's no routine. You cannot medicate, you know, your essential rhythms that your body needs. You know, you can't medicate against those. You have to work with your body. So they have a place, as does a lot of medication. I'm not anti-prescribing. I use them in certain circumstances. It's just not my first go-to, even with conventional medications.
Yeah, so I actually had probably my worst night's sleep ever, actually last week. So it's quite timely that we're having this discussion.
Susie. I was not last week either.
Great. So I find I go in kind of waves with this, and I know I'm pretty sure I know what I did, because I can normally see that I did something that has thrown my sleep off.
Yeah.
And I know what this was. And so I know we're going to talk a little bit about light, but in the evenings, I would normally wear my orange, you know, blue light blocking glasses. And I was doing group coaching. Oh, very nice, Sally. Very nice. I'm so glad you thought to bring a prop. So mine aren't as swish as those. I got them off eBay, and they're not the last word in stylishness, but anyway, I normally wear them in the evening. And because I was doing a group coaching session that started at 7 o'clock and it finished at 8:30, I didn't begin it wearing them. It didn't really occur to me. And then I was doing the thing, and as I was talking and listening, it was getting darker and darker, and I was sort of disappearing into the gloom for these people I was coaching. And I could not go to sleep that night. I was tired, but I was wired. I tried, I know a lot of tricks to relax myself. You know, I'm a health coach. I tried every single one. I went through, you know, mindful breathing, all sorts of things that would normally have an effect. Nothing worked. I was reading, you know, something kind of relaxing, and then I thought, well, this will work now. I've read, I'll go back to bed. And then eventually, with a mixture of horror and relief, I heard the birds, and I knew that I'd actually gone through the, you know, the whole night. And I find if I've had a really bad night, I then get in a bit of a cycle. And what also happens is I get ill very quickly.
Yeah.
And we know that our resistance, you know, they did research with exposing people to the cold virus after, you know, curtailing their sleep to 6 hours. I mean, I wish I'd had 6 hours. And I think they're massively more likely to develop a cold, aren't they?
Natural killer cells get reduced, which are our, you know, our initial defense system. Yeah,
that's it. And the other thing that happens immediately is my mood. I mean, I turn into a different person. Literally, I'm just vile when I just have my own personal grey cloud that I walk around with. I can't think. I had terrible brain fog. In fact, I actually cancelled. I was due to give a talk on sleep, would you believe? You know, like this. It was with a company that I work with, and my contact there is absolutely lovely. And I said, you know, would you mind if we just moved it till tomorrow? I'm just not feeling great. And I just felt it would have been hypocritical of me to come on and do a bright, shiny conversation about sleep when I've been up all night. Now, the way I sorted that was I actually took some melatonin. And I felt literally the next day, I felt like I'd won the lottery. That's how I feel when I've not been sleeping and I suddenly sleep. I just feel like you could offer me anything, like a holiday in you know, the grenadines. I'm not interested. I'm so happy that I've slept. That's all I care about.
No, I'm very similar. You know, exactly. Sleep deprivation has the same impact on me, and I think like mine's often to do with the emotional, or, you know, or stress that's going on in my life. And then the worst combination for me is then I numb by flicking through social media at night.
Right.
And, so I'm doing two things. I'm not dealing with my stress. I'm numbing by looking at my screen. Social media does this kind of FOMO, fear of missing out thing. So it makes me feel worse. And then you like the next day you're thinking, really, Sally? Like and my passion is always to model, you know what we do, and I don't want to ask my patients to do anything I don't do. But you do. Sometimes you just don't want to deal with stuff, do you? But I think the thing is, at least we know what we need to do, and then
you do.
And part of mine, sometimes I have to give my phone to my husband and go, just take it away. I can't stop at the moment, and I just need to go and sit, and whether it's journaling or breathing or, you know, and just relax.
Journaling is a great one, and I often get my clients to do that, just to kind of offload what's going around their head and get down onto paper. And there's just something so liberating about that. There's also tapping, EFT, which hopefully people who are listening to this episode will have heard a previous one, which is all about basically getting ourselves back to a state of calm through a very simple tapping process. I also get my clients doing a gratitude practice, because there is some research to show that people who do a gratitude practice, that's writing down 3 to 5 things that they're grateful for, and there are a whole host of benefits, but one of them is that they sleep better, they have better quality sleep, and also longer sleep. So this particular bit of research showed that they slept an extra half an hour a night, which cumulatively, of course, a week, that's going to really add up. So that's thinking of things that you're grateful for interrupts the cycle of anxiety that otherwise we just sit and marinate in. So that's a good one to do.
No, it is. And I think it's around, you know, having rhythms in our life and practices that, so I talk to people about, actually, you need to prepare yourself for sleep. So you reflected on things there around how sometimes we are doing life at such a high pace. The first time that our kind of body, mind and soul has to catch up with ourselves is when we put our head on the pillow. And then suddenly it's like, right, I need to process, because we do need to process. And it's the first time you've given an opportunity to it. And so we, you know, as a family, we have some practices, you know, where certainly, you know, sort of 7, 8 o'clock, I'll go and put the blinds down, I'll put low lighting on, get rid of the overhead lighting. And it's just moving and transitioning my family into thinking it's evening, let's slow down. And then having some of those practices around, you know, screens off, you know, whether it's a bath, whether it's, you know, using your journal, you know, whether it's some lovely sort of relaxing yoga or in your breathing, and having these things that just prepare you, and seeing that actually you need to prepare yourself to sleep, instead of just doing, right, I'm going to be really busy, and then 10 o'clock, bang, and then wonder what.
That doesn't work, because you're just lying there expecting to drop off, and you're still wired. And this is what one of the first things that I coach people to do is I explain to them that you need, as you say, you need a buffer between the busyness of your day and going to sleep, because the body is not wired in such a way that it will go to sleep, it will go unconscious when it's still in this state of stress. And if people are either on Facebook or checking emails right up until that final moment of putting their head on the pillow, then of course they're going to be wired and find it really difficult. So I'm actually really strict with phones, in that nobody is allowed to charge their phone in their bedroom. So we have like a radio alarm clock, and my kids know that they can listen to music in bed, but then it has to go out and it's charged somewhere else. So the main thing that I see with people who I coach, who maybe would say, well, of course, I don't choose not to sleep, but they may be choosing to do certain things just before sleep, which have a huge impact on their sleep. So I know many women who will go to sleep with their iPad, you know, on their chest, or under their pillow, actually, which is just not really a conducive way to get to sleep, to have all that stress, all that responsibility under your head.
Yeah.
Just in case. I was once coaching, there's actually a group of staff at a hospital, and one woman said, it's just in case someone needs me in the night, and then it's just there under my pillow.
Yeah.
So we really have to let go of the day, don't we? And it's like with kids, bath, bed, bath, book, bed, a wind down, and we need that wind down period as well.
And I think for those of people that aren't familiar, the whole thing with light is that, again, it's about this sleep hormone we've mentioned, the melatonin. So what we like, in order for your body to function really well, you want that hormone to be low in the daytime, and then we want it to ping up at night. And it works with that sleep urge to help us get to sleep. And we know it's the blue light that we want to be outside in the daytime for as long as possible. But if you're gonna have a break at work, go outside, get exposure to sunlight in order to suppress that. But then we know that you get blue light from our LED lighting, from our screens, from the TV. And that's why we're talking about taking those things out before you go to sleep, because it's suppressing that melatonin and suppressing that hormone. And sometimes there's like a 3-hour lag in some studies where somebody's been reading on an iPad compared to reading a book for that melatonin to ping up. And that's why you have to, actually create these rhythms where you stop using screens. And if you have to, then use your blue blocking glasses. They do help. But my challenge with that is, yes, it can help with the sleep bit, but as you've mentioned, it's what you're reading that then stimulates your stress response. And then you've got an issue with, well, you're thinking about this and you're stressed about that and you need to do that. And then you're creating, that hypervigilance, which is what we don't want either. So, in getting those things, an hour or two out of your life before you go to bed is just a win-win in terms of sleep. Yeah.
And it's so true what you say about what are you looking at as well. And I think it's so hard for us because there are so many distractions, aren't there? I mean, and you mentioned Netflix before, Sally, and I remember reading an interview with, the CEO of Netflix a few years ago, and I was horrified to read that he said, our biggest competitor is sleep. We don't want people to go to sleep. And it's so easy, isn't it? It's so easy to binge watch.
Yeah.
Everything is pulling at our attention to, watch this and scroll, and scrolling is endless. Yeah. So as you say, you have to be very decisive about prioritizing sleep. And because a lot of my job entails listening to people, so I've listened to many, many, many people talking about their nighttime. I use the word routines very loosely because I wouldn't call it a routine, but it is, I think when we actually stop and look what people are doing late at night in this country, I'll give you a few examples. So I have noticed a difference between men and women, actually, and I don't want to generalize, but this is just an observation that women I found were often doing things like, they call it mummy admin in bed. So they're on the iPad answering emails from school and things like that. Or it might be they were on YouTube videos watching, learning to do stuff. And some of the guys, initially I thought these were just one-off, but then I noticed a bit of a trend in that they were looking at anything. So I actually don't know what Reddit is because I've never been on it, but I have listened to a few guys explain to me that they will just lie in bed looking at whatever comes up, because the way these things are structured is it just is a rabbit hole. You look at one video or something and it leads you on to something else. And they'll tell me that they will just be reading about plane crashes, at 11 o'clock or 11:30. And this, again, not conducive to relaxing and going to sleep. I remember one guy who was in a corporate wellness workshop that I was doing, and he said that he sleeps terribly. And when he wakes up in the night and he can't go back to sleep, he'll take his iPad, go onto YouTube, and he will watch, I kid you not, jihadi recruitment videos. Yeah, so at 2 o'clock in the morning, when I was suggesting things like reading something very gentle, under a low light, he was looking at videos of beheadings, So I think that we do things sometimes which make sense to us, but perhaps aren't really working for us.
Yeah. And I think, that just strikes at a deeper thing about disconnection from ourselves and from others. And you know, we know from our work that loneliness and disconnection from purpose are massive drivers in all disease. And certainly for me, like, if life is painful and you know, I will numb, and these things do numb. They keep us distracted, they keep us from being present, they keep us from answering some deeper questions about our own loneliness, our own purpose. And so it's, you know, you're probably with me that you always have to ask the question under the question of why people are doing that, and getting underneath what's going on. And certainly some of the joys of my work is when you get that opportunity to really connect people with themselves, connect people with proper healthy relationships, getting out of toxic relationships. But you know, that giving people space to connect with purpose about how they're created, who they're created for, what keeps them wired, it's like those are the things, when you get there, that seems to change behavior. Because I think otherwise it's just this, our internal emotional pain of lostness and loneliness will just drive our overeating, our overconsumption of Netflix and YouTube, because we don't know what to do. We don't know how to be still. We don't know how to be alone, because it's terrifying when we're disconnected.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something so profound and so fundamental in what you've just said. And I feel like I'd actually like to talk to you for another 3 hours now, just about what you've said. But I do want to touch on what you said about stillness, you know, how to be still, because I've noticed, particularly with younger people, again, when I'm going into a company and there's a lot of younger people, what they will say to me is that they will be on their phone looking at, you know, YouTube or Reddit, whatever it is, up until the last second, because otherwise they wouldn't know what to do. It would be seen as dead time, where they would be like, I don't know what to do. And that is why they, up until that last second of switching the light off, they feel that they have to be scrolling and looking and going from one video to the next. And I think you're right, we have lost the ability to just be still, be with ourselves, find that inner calm.
And it's fascinating looking at the research, because it's often, if you look at the creatives and some of the genius things that have been created, you know, in our lifetime, it comes through boredom. Like everybody would talk, you get to the point where you get bored and then the magic happens. And we have a whole generation that just don't know how to do that. They're constantly amused, you know, to muse is to think, amuse is to not think. We are constantly amused. And boredom's painful. Like, it's painful for the parents as well. I don't know about you, like it is the phrase at the moment in lockdown, I'm bored, mummy. But actually, and so there is a revival in teaching people how to be still, and how to break through the pain and the discomfort and get to that deeper place where you can connect with yourself, which is really beautiful to do. And there's techniques to it, and doing it with people initially can be really helpful. But I think, and then getting to that place where we live inside out lives, like we live from knowing who we are and living from that still place with a clear sense of purpose, is the most life-giving, exhilarating, you know, place to be living from. And we do need to learn how to do it, which is another podcast, Susie.
We're not taught how to do it at school, are we? And I think it's really hard for younger people, particularly, I see a lot of young men where gaming has just taken over. And I'm thinking about an example of a guy, again, who was in a corporate group I was coaching before lockdown, and he would come back from work in the evenings and he would fall asleep exhausted for 2 or 3 hours, and then get up and then be gaming in the night, and then drag himself to work the following day, and was, of course, like a zombie. And his bedroom was set up in such a way that he could do this gaming from, you know, from his bed on his pillow, and at the end of his bed there was this huge screen looming over him. So his entire bedroom was tech, which of course is the opposite. You know, we want to get bedrooms tech free. I mean, even to the point of getting rid of an electric toothbrush charger, because that light is as you say, is going to interfere with the production of melatonin. And I think a lot of young people are literally surrounded, physically surrounded by these things, which are robbing them of sleep, robbing them of so much more than sleep. You know, this stillness, robbing them of chances to thrive at work, because how on earth can you thrive at work if you're sleep deprived?
And it's interesting, because that must be meeting a need, like that the gaming must be about connection, and it's you need, you know, we're hardwired for belonging, aren't we, and for love and for connection, and so we need to find that from somewhere. You know, you can't just stop these things, because some people think, well, I just need to tell my son to stop. Well, it's feeding something in him, and what is it that we can put there in place of that will feed that need, so that he has the freedom to turn it on and off. I mean, that's the root of all addiction, isn't it? Just whether it's we're addicted to food or screens or whatever, it's we need to get to the root of finding some other things that give us that sense of comfort, belonging and love.
It's so true. And that's why I think that often a very simplistic way of, you know, kind of really badgering people to get rid of all the sugar and everything, but if they're using that as a crutch to distract themselves from really, really uncomfortable feelings, it's just not it's just not going to work to tell them, well, just stop eating it, you know.
No, absolutely. I think the whole willpower thing it just doesn't work. You know, it's not about exerting willpower. It's about getting underneath the questions of why we do things. And then it's the need to do it as, I think, also asking people to change as individuals. I don't know what your view is, but I see that as pretty pointless as well, because you actually need to create rhythms around family. So I tried to really, well, my health coach really tries to work with that wider context of creating patterns for the family, because then you do it together, and there's that sense of when we do it together, it tends to bring more sustainable change. Where if there's just you against, you know, the rest of your household, you know, the easiest thing is we will eventually doing what the rest of the household is, and so that need to create rhythms for our families and our communities, and that's why it's a wider question. It's not just about hitting people over the head with the knowledge and telling them to do it. You know, it's about policy, it's about community, it's about how we do lives together.
That's true. So as you say, that's a whole lot of subjects that we've kind of wandered into on the back of sleep, but we know that everything is connected to everything else. You know, it's never just one thing, is it, Sally? But are there any last tips that, in terms of sleep hygiene, we've touched on light, we've touched on temperature. I mean, I think like getting an eye mask, you know, if you can't get the room dark, you don't have blackout curtains.
No, that's another helpful thing. I mean, on my website, if you drsallybell.com and you look under the resource section, I've done a little cheat sheet. So if people are like, oh, what did she say? You can just get it. But I've forgotten to put temperature on it, so just remember that one. But so yeah, we talked about, you know, getting out and the sunshine in the morning, reducing our screens in the evening, getting caffeinated drinks out, having a regular schedule. Getting active in the daytime can help, but avoiding strenuous exercise in the evenings. You know, if you're a late night gym bunny, that can increases the stress response. So, you know, being active in the daytime. Keeping your bed for sleep and romance. That can be another thing. So not working in bed and not, you know, not having other activities in bed, but just trying to keep that. Decluttering your room, and just having some order where it's all about sleep. And so your body will associate your bed with sleep. You know, as you said, getting rid of all kind of, you know, turning off your Wi-Fi and electronic devices. You know, we haven't talked about electronic magnetic fields and the impact of that.
Because that, for people who are using their phone as an alarm, I mean, there are so many problems, aren't there, with having your phone next to your brain. You know, I mean, apart from the fact that if it's right there and you wake up to go blue at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's just so tempting, isn't it, to just I'll just see what I've missed on Facebook in the past couple of hours, isn't it? And then of course you ding. So can you talk very briefly about why it's perhaps not a good idea to have the phone right next to your head?
I think I would need to sit with the research again, Susie, before I talked about that.
Sure.
I feel a
Fair
bit
enough. Fair enough. But
I might misinform you.
in terms of having the temptation,
Yeah.
For one thing, isn't it? You know, if it's right by.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there is some research, and I can't recall where I read this, that even if you are asleep, if the phone is right by your head, the sleep is not of the same quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know about that. Yeah, and I think there's a whole host of things around EMF that's quite controversial, but I've dipped into looking at the research. I just don't think I've landed what, you know, I'm aware that it's something at some point I personally am going to have to contend with, but I've not gone back to the original research, so that's why I hesitate
No.
Yes, and then we talked about relaxation practices, magnesium, and things like journaling and having, you know, those routines that help us. So I think those are all of the things. Sometimes, like I said, my essentials are routine, caffeine, and light, and then I'd go temperature, and then those other bits I add into depending on how well I'm sleeping.
Yeah, and if people were to kind of experiment, maybe with taking magnesium, you know, do you have any sort of recommendations around that, and melatonin? Like, is it safe to take? Do you only take it for like a couple of days, or?
Yeah. So I think magnesium can't really go wrong. I think there's certain like renal conditions where you might want to talk to a doctor before you take any things like that. But as I said, magnesium, you know you've overdosed because it upsets your tummy. But yeah, you could try that for a few weeks. Melatonin I use less, like it's definitely, there's evidence around sort of over 55s for short-term use, or for people who are, you know, where there's issues around jet lag and using it for short-term use. And short-term, I would say up to 2 weeks. Yeah, that certainly could help, just to help create rhythms, but it's not a long-term solution as far as I'm aware. Again, I might be misinformed. I'm very happy to be corrected, but that's my understanding. So yeah, and then things like your passion flower and your valerian root, I'd have a chat with a naturopath, and again, I would give it a few weeks, as well as, you know, all the other things we've talked about. But yeah, but it's, as I said, you can't mask some essential things, you know, with these kind of medications, like they work with your body.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things is, as well, as you touched on right at the beginning, is you actually have to be giving yourself enough sleep opportunity.
Yes.
So if you know you need to get up at 7 o'clock and you need 8 hours, you need to work backwards, but then understand that you're not going to fall asleep the second you get into bed. Yeah. So get those 8 hours. You might need to be in bed for 9 hours.
Yes,
you know, depending on how quickly you fall asleep. And I think that is what is very much misunderstood and perhaps not appreciated, that and I just see so many people who at midnight are just pottering around or watching Netflix, or they're maybe falling asleep in the living room in front of the TV, which is really common, and then sort of having to wake themselves up all groggy to go to bed, or they're, I don't know, baking, or like 101 things. So it's about being really strict, and sometimes I will think, you know what, the kitchen, fine, you know, it will get done tomorrow. Yeah. It's more important that I go to bed now than start cleaning the oven.
Yeah, no, definitely. You're not going to find me cleaning the oven at that night. I can't remember the last time I cleaned my oven. Oh dear. So yeah, sometimes the message is just prioritizing it. People have no idea the impact it has on every aspect of our health. I mean, it has been an utter revelation for me, you know, and in my parenting. And I mean, as I said, it's had the biggest impact in how I live my own life and how I practice in terms of helping people recover their health. It is just a game changer. And in the weight loss story, like, I'm so, you know, that would be a lovely discussion to have about obesity and how complex that is, and how we need to personalize that. again.
So true.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. So we'll have to, hopefully
Yeah.
we'll come back and do that another day. But I want to thank you, Sally, so much for sharing your wisdom. I really do love your very gentle, compassionate, holistic approach. I think it's just so inspirational, and I just hope it inspires so many other people working in the medical profession to, to take the same approach.
Yeah.
So
So great. And so people can find me like on social media, my little hashtag things, Dr. Sally Bell, and I've started a little YouTube channel. It's a bit scrappy, but but join the movement. I mean, I think you and I are united in heart. Like, we need a movement.
we are.
And united voices to recover the health for our nation. And so, just want people to join us in that. We want to drip feed them all the wonderful things that they can do to recover their health.
That's it, because it's all about empowering people.
It is.
That's the thing. If you just try tweaking these little things, see what happens, and you can do it yourself. You don't need me, you don't need you. You can do this.
Yeah. And we need to hear how people are getting on. We
do. So I would say to people listening, please, if you're going to have a play with any of these things that Sally's talked about, Sally and I, we'd love to hear back from people. So please do get in touch with us and let us know how you're getting on.
Brilliant. Have a great
All right. Thank you so much, Sally. I hope to see you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.